Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently and have had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Eddie Einhorn, who died recently at the age of 80. Eddie Einhorn was a nice Jewish boy from Paterson, New Jersey, who teamed up with Jerry Reinsdorf to buy the Chicago White Sox from Bill Veeck in 1981. Price, if you can believe it, was $19 million. But Einhorn is more important for bringing college basketball to national television, largely on the strength of one broadcast in 1968. Here's WGN on the death of Eddie Einhorn.
We've lost a major figure in the world of Chicago sports. White Sox co-owner and vice chairman Eddie Einhorn has died.
Einhorn was a beer and hot dog vendor at Comiskey Park while he was a law student at Northwestern. He, of course, eventually worked as an executive with the team for 35 years, 25 as vice chairman and 10 as chief operating officer. He started his career in broadcasting. He was known as a sports television pioneer and champion of youth baseball, founding the National Youth Baseball Championships. Also instrumental in having college basketball syndicated.
WGN's Rich King joins us now on the phone. Rich, you worked with Eddie Einhorn for many years.
Yeah, he was a great producer, innovator. We did the Elvin Hayes ALCINDOR game, and he did a lot of stuff for CBS, I believe, and network television, all those weekend shows, those Superman shows and stuff they did with tractors and all that stuff. Forceful guy, but I found him to be very generous to me and very generous to a lot of people.
Well, college basketball was not a nationally televised sport when Eddie Einhorn founded the TVS television network, and in 1968 he televised the game of the century, number 1 UCLA, featuring Lou Alcindor before he was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, versus number 2 Houston, featuring the number 2 player in the country, Elvin Hayes, in the Astrodome before more than 52,000 people. Here are some of the participants talk about that game.
The Astrodome in Houston, Texas.
People still remember that game.
The largest crowd ever to see a college basketball game.
It was one of the biggest moments in basketball history.
The nation's 2 top teams meet in the sports spectacular of the year.
There's all types of great games that have happened since then, but I don't think there's been as much anticipation or excitement about a basketball game as there was for this particular one.
The year 1968. The nation's top 2 ranked teams, both unbeaten, were to meet for the first time. The University of Houston had a successful, though untested, program, while UCLA hadn't lost a game in 2 years.
UCLA was the most heralded basketball team in college basketball at the time. They were riding a 47-game win streak. We were number 2 and they were number 1.
We got a scouting report before the game. He said, "There's no use you playing UCLA. They are the best. You just don't have a chance."
We had never lost a college basketball game, and this was just going to be another big challenge for us that we had met.
They were the team to beat. They had the coaching, they had the players, they had the reputation, they had the history.
For Coach Lewis, the matchup was 2 years in the making. It hadn't been easy to coach UCLA down south, particularly at such an unusual location.
Coach came in and said, "Well, we got them. We're going to play them January the 20th in the Astrodome." Everybody began to wonder, in the Astrodome?
We practiced in a gym of 2,000 maximum. We played in a stadium of 5,500. 55,000, it's a big difference.
To say that you're going to put an event in the Astrodome, and it's not football, and you want to sell it out, and you want to promote it, and you want to sell tickets, and you want to make money, you're not going to get too many takers on that.
Basketball was a regional game. In the South, basketball was almost non-existent because it was football.
I remember watching the NCAA tournament, and they had it on late at night over the weekend. It was very difficult to catch. You had to really plan, and it wasn't shown nationwide.
There had never been a national televised basketball game. Nobody wanted the game. They said, "Oh, that will never work. Nobody will ever watch that."
What they would watch was the matchup of 2 All-Americans, legends in the making.
They pitted then Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar against me.
So it was a clash of the Titans, more or less. These are 2 great players with unbelievable egos, and no one is willing to step aside and let the other get in front.
Kareem had basically everything that I wanted. He was the best player in college basketball. I wanted to be College Player of the Year. His star, to me, was shining very brightly, and I wanted to replace his star with my star that year.
In just a few moments, the largest crowd ever to see a college basketball game will watch the nation's two top teams.
I remember in the locker room before this game, before we came out, we were all wondering, really, will anybody be out there?
Here's the official paid attendance tonight, 52,693, the largest paid audience to ever see basketball anywhere at any level.
It wasn't like a college arena. It wasn't like any professional arena that I've ever played in, because we had the court that was here, and then you had 100 feet before the fans.
And you had this huge area of emptiness. It was scary.
We played the game at second base in the Astrodome. It was weird. It's like playing out on a prairie someplace.
Sound bounced around. The sound would go way up to the roof of the dome and then come back down on you.
We would score, dead silence. They would score, dead silence. And then this roar would come down upon us because it took that long for the sound to get from the fans to us on the floor.
I don't think either team really felt comfortable, but Elvin Hayes must have felt very comfortable. He had the game of his career.
It was 2 baskets and a floor, and so for a basketball player, that's all you need.
There's the man they want to get it to. It's Hayes, 15-footer.
Elvin had the kind of a game that most basketball players dream of. He seemingly could not miss.
Score! Elvin Hayes, cheered on by Coach Sky Lewis.
Didn't matter if the ball was in his face or not, the ball was going in.
Driven off to Hayes, who scores. Hayes has 35.
And as the game gets closer and closer towards the end, we haven't hit our normal UCLA run.
We near the final minute. Houston, 69. UCLA, 67.
And it never happened.
Houston leads by 2. Oh, Warren deflected away from Shackelford. It'll go to Houston.
The most scariest moment for me in the basketball game, and it still is, whenever I watch the old film of it. The inbound pass, I'm down there with one hand dribbling the ball around.
It's the Hound and the Dogs.
I'm boom, 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 boom. And there's Jabbar and Lucius Allen. They could have stole the basketball from me and made a layup.
Elvin was a great shooter, but he wasn't the greatest of ball handlers. Somebody get to him and get the ball. Get the ball from Elvin.
3 seconds. The Houston UCLA's 47-game winning streak and pandemonium at the Astrodome.
There was 55,000 people in this place, and they were going crazy and going wild. And I think that is one of the most memorable moments in my basketball history.
Coming off that floor, my legs were as heavy as they've ever been. This losing was not part of my vocabulary at all, and it hurt.
There was silence in the locker room. It was the first time that we had lost. It was a terrible feeling.
The next day, and for that remaining of the week, they showed that game on TV every single day.
In seeing this game, people realized how popular the sport was, and if you made it available to its fans, they'd watch it.
It just created a euphoria in the atmosphere of college basketball that wasn't there. And I think that game just kicked the door open, the windows out, and knocked the roof off the house. What we have today in March Madness is what I think the game in 1968, opened.
I have to mention Alcindor had a scratched cornea that day, which might have accounted for his performance, and UCLA avenged that loss in the NCAA tournament, beating Houston by 32 points. We're going to move on now to Umberto Eco, who died recently at the age of 84. He was an Italian author and scholar, best known for his 1980 novel, The Name of the Rose, set in a 14th century Franciscan monastery. Here is BBC4's Last Word, featuring Matthew Bannister talking about Umberto Eco.
Umberto Eco was the Italian academic who also wrote best-selling novels. The most successful was the medieval detective story The Name of the Rose, which sold more than 10 million copies and became a film starring Sean Connery.
Penitentia agite was the rallying cry of the Dulcianites. Dulcianites? Who were they, Master? Those who believed in the poverty of Christ. So do we Franciscans. But they also declared that everyone must be poor, so he slaughtered the rich.
Umberto Eco was fluent in 5 modern languages, as well as Latin and classical Greek. His literary success made him a sought-after speaker at conferences and book events. He also wrote weekly columns in the Italian press on popular culture and politics, and he continued to teach semiotics at the University of Bologna. Dr. Florian Musknuk is reader in Italian and comparative literature at University College London.
Semiotics is the study of signs, of messages in any language, and it could be applied to images, it could be applied to ancient texts, but it could also be applied to popular culture.
It is not true that human beings produce signs, words, in order to tell what is the case. probably more than 50% of time they produce science in order to say the contrary.
His early interest in popular culture is something which divided the academic opinion at the time. I think people found him to be occupying territory they were not necessarily familiar with. So the academics felt that he was very much a popular writer and a successful writer, and novelists felt that he was also very successful. Academics, that people found him perhaps intimidating, but certainly sort of there was a sense that his talents were always also elsewhere.
You have the intellectual duty to analyze in the same way a poem by Homer and the words of a very popular song. This doesn't mean that they are the same thing. On the contrary, I think that a good analyst can prove why Homer is more important or greater or not than a popular song.
His breakthrough to international fame came with the name of The Rose.
It was a detective story set in the Middle Ages, so he used all his talents. He used his interest in detective fiction. He had written about Conan Doyle, he'd written essays on Sherlock Holmes, but he also was, of course, a very talented medievalist, so he knew that period.
Let us suppose a man has been killed by poison. This is a given fact. It is possible for me to imagine, in the face of certain undeniable signs, that the poisoner is a second man. On such simple chains of causes, my mind can act with a certain confidence in its power. But how can I complicate the chain, imagining that, to cause the evil deed, there was yet another intervention, not human this time, but diabolical?
He himself described the novel as a text that one could read at several different levels, that one could read it for enjoyment only, one could also read it as a political allegory. And he said there was also sort of a degree of intertextuality and pastiche which would appeal to his most erudite readers. So he was very good at speaking to all audiences. In a sense, I believe, certainly in the Italian context, there was a demand for more readable, more enjoyable fiction. Italy didn't have at that point much of a tradition of popular fiction, and here was something which was actually successful as a detective story, but at the same time had that pedigree of high culture because he was the very well-known and well-respected professor and public figure. So I think it's the kind of book which people could give as a Christmas present and could enjoy reading as well.
It entertained me, and I think that the readers smell that.
He was certainly a very well-respected figure. I think he was one of the most prominent figures of cultural life for many years.
We're going to close tonight with James Hugh Loden, a.k.a. Sonny James, who died recently at the age of 87. Great country singer from Hackleburg, Alabama, who had one of the great crossover rock country hits of the 20th century. He had a string of number ones on the country charts, but I liked his crossover covers. Here he is with the Johnny Preston classic Running Bear. We did Johnny Preston's podcast a couple years back.
As her hands touched and her lips met, the raging river pulled them down. Now they'll always be together in their happy hunting ground. Running bear, love a little white dove with a love big as the sky. Running bear, love a little white dove with a love that couldn't die.
Here's Sonny James with the word version of the great instrumental Apache.
Alone, all alone by the campfire, she dreamed of her love, her delight. Away, far away on the prairie, her love, golden hawk, shared the night.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And as I said, in 1957, Sonny James had one of the great crossover rock hits of the 20th century.
When an ex-GI, just back from Japan, walked out here to the microphone on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, and he did Young Love. It was one of the all-time high spots on the Grand Ole Opry, and in the weeks that followed, 2 million people bought his record of that song. The ex-GI who made musical history that night was the Southern gentleman, Sonny James.
They say for every boy and girl there's just one love in this whole world, and I found my young love.